I'll start the story that I heard it from, like Papa knew it, your grandmother knew that story. So the story, that's how I started, like, they're kind of not complete. They start from somewhere and they just end like, because that's how they remember it, But there's a lot of small ones. So our grandfather was a doctor, so he had a house. They were living in that house, and then his wife had just delivered, or the baby died because there was no baby that they took. And she was bleeding, hemorrhaging. So that's what's happening. And then a news comes that you better leave, evacuate your home and leave, because this army of hordes, lords, I don't know, they're coming to all these Assyrian and killing the Assyrians, going to the Assyrian villages and killing them. Sorry, genocide. But they were living in Rizal, so they were living in a city. But still, everybody knows who's Assyrian, who's not, right?
Yeah.
So the story is that they came at night. They said, you better leave because tomorrow their army will reach here. So my grandfather tells a manservant, not a kitchen servant, kind of a caretaker, and because they had a carriage with a horse. He would take care of it. Said, feed the horses and put water and some stuff on the carriage. So they left very early in the morning before the sun came up. So there's Papa. He's 4, like his older brother's 6, and Antu, your grandmother, she's older, and Lily. Anyway, so they sit on the carriage, and his wife's brother also leaves with another carriage. But but he leaves his wife that had just given birth and bleeding. Her and the mother stay there. They can't go. They can't travel. And they never see them again. Apparently she dies that night from bleeding. And the mother was killed by the intruders by putting heavy rocks on her stomach, asking where the family has gone. This is the story. So now they're going, he said, so the carriage takes them, and all of a sudden the horse doesn't go. And then the story was, and then probably their father, they had heard it from their father because they're young, right? The one that's telling the story to us. He said probably the servant, they didn't see the servant the next day. Probably he didn't feed the horse and he ran away because he was an Assyrian, right? He was afraid if they would find him in that house. So the horse is not moving because he hasn't eaten. And what to do? My grandfather gives the 2 boys, my father and his brother, to the uncle. He said, you take them, and I will bring the other ones, the older ones, with me on foot because, but these are young, so you take them. So they get separated. And that's when his Papa's brothers, the older brother's foot is injured, and it gets infected or whatever. And then after days and days going, there was a lack of water. So he said, it seems everybody was thirsty and we didn't know where to get water. And we found a little stream of like kind of muddy water, and people were all gathered. So they joined the group of other Assyrians that were like going together.
Yeah.
So anyway, when they're looking for water, he said that they had found this dirty, muddy water somewhere, and everybody was around there trying to get something out of it. And he said, we called my brother Juju. Juju's like a kid's name, you know.
Yeah.
We called him Juju, and he was crying. He wanted the water, and then there was an older lady there sitting. She was putting her scarf in the water, and then taking the water, so this way the water was cleaner out of the mud and stuff. And then she saw us, young one sitting there, and this just crying, and then she came close to give the water, and then they found out it was their grandmother that they were separated from. That's like days have passed. So the person that came, so they found each other like this next to the water. Like that was one of this like traumatic stories.
Right.
Because now they're separated from their from father and your grandmother and the other older sister, and there was a cousin. And that cousin, so now those people are on foot, they're walking.
Yeah.
And they said the cousin, they tied the gold around her because they up like they had gold those days. They go,
Right.
So they had tied them. Slowly she discarded them because it was getting heavy when you're walking on it. She said everybody started letting go of all their valuable things. Like somebody was supposed to get married, and the dress was sent from America and had a lot of beads. And so the only thing she wanted to take was that dress. And then they were on foot. So things become heavy. And then she said, I cut all the pretty parts that had beads and carry them. And then I even let go of them, She was just like keeping part of the dress little by little. What would you eat? Like all these people, he said, we had a little army of like maybe 300 people, young men, or the army that was kind of protecting us. They would be carrying flour and oil. And that's all we had. They would fry the flour in the oil, and that's what we would eat for a long time. That was the only food. And then my who was it? One of the aunts or the cousin, she said the women stopped having their periods. We're talking about months that they were, so they stopped having periods, because I don't know. Like these are all the stories that I would hear. To me, what the story of this big escape, Rakagura, was always amusing as a child when I would hear it. And it stayed with me. It was like a real story. And the way they told it, it was just, and I was like, hey, you were there, and the other one was there. So they were like, it was like eyewitness, right? And then when I grew up, I realized that it was what a great tragedy they went through. And they were just sitting telling us like bedtime stories, But it was a goddamn tragedy, like atrocities that they felt, or anyway. So, but nobody has written, or if they have written, I don't know about it. And everyone is dying one by one. No one they knew the stories. So it will be good if some of them are left somewhere in somebody's ear.